Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. We've got some great panelists up here. So we're going to talk about the digital infrastructure, the foundational elements of it. So we're going to start with a couple, we'll have everybody introduce themselves and who they work for, and then we'll go from there. So go ahead, Kristian.
I'm Kristian Weeks with Tish Inspire, work on our operational technology across the US.
Hi, good afternoon. Prabin Kanel, Chief Information and Digital Officer at Beacon Communities, based out of Boston, multifamily.
Hi, Girish Gopalan. I head real estate partnerships at Meter. We're an enterprise networking company for owners and occupiers, focused on commercial.
Craig Behm with the Millennia Companies out of Cleveland, Ohio. We focus on multifamily as well as we do have some low-end or higher-end restaurants and a hotel in Cleveland.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to really divide the conversation into two sections. The first is on the digital infrastructure side is the physical attributes. What do we need at these properties in order for us to deliver services to either the residents or the tenants? So Craig, I'll start with you, sort of on the physical outlook of a property. What does it look like from an infrastructure perspective?
So I think, anything's pretty basic, right? So you're going to start with your internet, right? We've got to have that. So we've got to have it for our offices. The rest of it's really going to depend on what type of property you're looking at. So if we're looking at our multifamily, call it HUD, LIHTC properties, you're going to have requirements. You've got to meet those from HUD. So you've got tenant Wi-Fi you've got to provide tenant internet for that. Whereas on the conventional side, you're looking more to converged infrastructure where you're touching the tenant from the sidewalk to their apartment. Okay, so you've got a lot of different infrastructure that you're going in, you're put in different networks. We start with our firewalls. We have to start there. Everything has got to be secured. So we segregate everything out on separate VLANs. We keep everything secured so that what the tenant is touching on the internet that we're providing to them is not going to touch our corporate network. So that's what
great. Kristian, from a commercial perspective, if we take that same sort of question and say, hey, physically, what do we need at a commercial office building in order to deliver these services? Where do you start and how do you think through that?
Yeah, there's basically kind of three things to be looking at. One is the kind of vertical stack. It's then kind of into the tenant space. And then there's kind of what's sitting in the street and existing. So all around that, that's basically in a converged network that you want to be looking at. So you have access control throughout. And then you basically need to have Wi-Fi and DAS.
Got it. So that's sort of one of the things that's evolved over the past couple of years. Before, landlords didn't have to worry too much about the infrastructure in the building. The tenants sort of figured that all out. But now we're seeing with the push towards amenitization, the landlord has to provide these services. And in a residential environment, it's a must-have. You can't rent space without it. Girish, talk to us a little bit about, from a connectivity side of it, how is Meter sort of set up to help a commercial owner or a residential owner with connectivity?
Yeah, I would love to. So we started our business really serving occupiers, and we do firewalls, switches, access points, and then we design, deploy, and manage networks for them. What they started to tell us is that Meter's great for my networking needs relative to the past decade I spent with other technologies, but you don't have a system where I can just move into a space, flip a switch and get internet connectivity. And so that's really where we've started to partner with real estate owners, where they have vacant space, especially on the commercial side. We will put our infrastructure in those vacant spaces and make them turnkey and ready to activate for their tenants.
Great. So we've talked a little bit about the physical side of it. Now let's get into sort of the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, the systems that you need. Prabin, when you're looking at this sort of from your perspective, what equipment, infrastructure, and digital assets are you having to deploy at the properties to sort of take care of what you need to take care of?
Yeah, in addition to what, just so that everybody's aware of it, Beacon Communities, 80% of our units are affordable. So we work with a resource constraint. There's not a whole lot of money to be spent at the property all the time. And when we have to provide internet connectivity to our residents, it's always a challenge to make sure that they have enough to do, like, check their emails and stuff. We do have a couple of properties which are supportive housing, trying to house homeless population so that they can get through their life to the next level. And it's always a challenge to provide the bandwidth that they need to be able to succeed in whatever direction, journey they are going through.
Are you required though to provide internet to the residents, or are you having a service provider that may be providing those services and you're sort of managing the connection?
Both now. I think there's a subsidy that you can tap into from HUD where you can provide internet connectivity to the resident, and you can get monthly subsidized fee for it. Whereas what we do is partnering with carriers, like Verizon and others, to have them come in and provide the discounted sort of
Right.
connectivity at the residence unit. That's what we've been working through right now. Is we don't own it, we don't manage it. Let them own it and let them manage it. It's just we give them the
Right.
space
So
to-
either a bulk deal with a service provider, or you partner with them and let them sell direct.
Correct.
But you also need to remember, like AT&T started back in like the 1930s, right? And that infrastructure that came through. This is a fairly recent, adoption. And basically, you had the, AOL days that kind of expanded data centers, and now we're seeing 2.0 of that. So it's an interesting little, as we have to go look at this subsidized network and then the for-profit sector, as you're describing, it affects multiple sectors, including, commercial and other sectors.
One of the things that we're all sort of dealing with in the real estate space is how do we provide these services to the tenants? But then really from a landlord perspective, what services are you providing? And from an IT perspective, Craig, for you guys, where do you start and stop? Where do you stop in terms of what services you're providing at the property? And for you at corporate, what are you supporting at the property level that you need to be worried about?
So what are we worried about? Everything, right? So, when you're looking at, obviously from a security standpoint, when you're talking with the residents, it really varies. On the conventional side, you want to touch those residents from the sidewalk till they get to their door. So you're dealing with the access control systems, the camera systems, how are they getting in and out of their doors, right? The digital locks, that kind of stuff. On the lower income side, the HUD housing, again, you're going to follow the regulations, right? You got to do what you got to do. But like, as you said, there's not a lot of money in that. So you're pretty much stopping right there. You're going to meet those requirements, maybe a little bit extra on there with some amenities as far as, Wi-Fi throughout the property, as opposed to just a business center. Sometimes you will do that if you have the funds for it. But very often there is not. From the property management standpoint, we don't stop from corporate, right? So we have everything is tied back in we'll call it a poor man's SD-WAN. So everything is connected back to our corporate office. So our employees there at the management office are connecting to our corporate network when they log in. It gives us the ability to secure that as well as to see everything that they're doing and provide for them what they need. So when we change property management, as probably you guys know, there's a high turnover in that. So we can seamlessly change that over to the next person. So we're not constantly shipping laptops back and forth. We can actually just change that laptop right away to the next person.
So would you basically, your infrastructure would be considered more of a hybrid? So you've got a combination of some cloud, you've got on-prem, and
absolutely.
foundational for you is connectivity. You have to have the connectivity.
Yeah, connectivity is obviously number one. I think that's your base foundation right there. So from a cloud perspective, we do have an Azure cloud where we keep a lot of data. We have some stuff that's on premise that we have to keep on premise, so we have to allow connectivity back into that. From a cloud standpoint, we have gone through the Azure route. And pretty much put everything in there that we need to, that our property management staff can get to, as well as our maintenance staff who may not be logging in the office. They could be out on the property via their cell phones or tablets.
Just to add to it, I think for us, what's been interesting is when I first started at Beacon, nothing was standardized, so we had to standardize all our infrastructure. And I started with firewall first, firewall and the switches and the APs from the connectivity perspective and the security perspective. And then it's interesting until something happens at the property with any other infrastructure that's out there, it's not our problem. They want to manage it, right? Your security camera to everything, like they want to manage it. And then something happens and they reach out to IT saying, can you help us do this now? And that's where we run into problems where we don't have an inventory of everything that's out there at the property yet. Through the acquisition, this is something that we hadn't done at Beacon, and we're slowly doing that, is building out the inventory and also standardizing all those uh, other infrastructure that's at our property right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that folks, in commercial real estate and in multifamily, the assets trade, they change, they all have different eras when they were built and developed. So when you're looking at a new asset, you're taking it on either via acquisition. Kristian, how do you guys get your arms around that, and how do you try and establish a baseline?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically there's each real estate as a whole is on the commercial side has been very kind of deregulated. Individual kind of buildings were kind of their own fiefdoms, and now it's kind of been commoditized to where you need a brand. So where that comes into play is, the end users, customers want to have a uniform experience across the threshold. So like that includes kind of doing an assessment of the building to kind of look at what of those three things that we talked about previously is included, then kind of building a plan to go work at it, and then get feedback. So in essence, look at where there are deficiencies or needs as coming out, drones, those types of things are new new technology.
The thing I'd add is that, M&A in real estate happens so quickly, and you have often days between when a transaction closes and when you have to have a new system up and running. So we always recommend to our clients, have your standards in place, know what you want to put in, so that as you're going through the process of acquiring and selling assets, it's much more turnkey.
Yeah, SOPs are key, right? And like, where do you send rent, right? If you go to the wrong lockbox, then where do you track it down, right? Checks and everything else going into the digital world, is kind of the new point there.
The one thing that, as part of the acquisition itself, that I don't negotiate are the two things: is the connectivity and the security. Rest of them, we can work through it to make sure that everything is to the Beacon standard at some point. But right off the bat, it's like, I'm going to bring in my own firewall so that my team can manage it remotely. And I'm going to make sure that the bandwidth, the connectivity is there, what we need to be able to manage that. Those are the two things I don't negotiate. On the development side of it, it's been fascinating working with them to come up with a standardized infrastructure that we want to put it in there. And they have a blueprint now. So every single sort of proposal they put together, they list out like, this is what is going to go into our building. So that's something that we have standardized on the development side of it. Acquisition is always challenging.
And there's also the regulatory piece, right? Hurricane Sandy came into New York and wiped out a lot of the copper infrastructure. So that's accelerated a lot of the replacement projects there. And then you have the fires on the West Coast that cause a lot of disruptions with the fiber networks. This is where you need the redundancy to kind of be able to hit the different channels and still provide that kind of component.
You guys, in terms of investment, when you're being asked to spend money on technology, which they usually don't give you a lot, what are you prioritizing? Obviously, we've heard cyber, we've heard sort of a firewall, sort of as that's a start point. What other elements of the technology do you find you need to make that investment in? You go argue for some upfront capital to kind of get squared away before you go much further.
Yes, I don't know that I've ever been asked to go spend money on IT, but I'm waiting for it. That'd be great when that happens. But again, as you said, security is number one, right? So that's where we got to secure everything. Cybersecurity is huge. We've got to secure everything there. If I'm looking at what I want to invest in, if I'm going to my ownership and saying, "Hey, spot me this money because I want to invest in it," of course I've got to show the ROI on it. But we're looking at how much can we do it faster, right? Leasing retention, right? Especially on our conventional side. What can we do there with our tenants from an automated standpoint to provide for that when that lease renewal comes up? We're not looking at our tenants for the first time in 12 months since they showed up. So we want to do a lot of automation there where our tenants feel connected to the property, and how can we do that from a technology standpoint so that those tenants want to renew with us.
So are you looking at like tenant engagement apps and those types of tools? Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I think one other area is trying to be a little bit more proactive as we're looking at this, right? So technology has really only been around here, and the smartphone's been around we're on 17 years now. So a lot of that's a new 1 and 2 generations, and so that's really where we're trying to be proactive and it's basic experience coming in. So keep the cell phone working throughout the whole garage, going up the elevator stack to then going into your space. You can go and do your walk-up song in the elevators. You can go and do whatever AI and kind of overlay it. Hey, why do why I need to do a work order? We know that light bulb's been running for low voltage for some time. So let's go ahead and just replace it.
Prabin, just from your perspective, if they say, here's some money, go spend it, well, how would you do it?
So I think they never say that, but I think where we've been a little bit successful in terms of putting in technology that's proactively managing the monitoring the infrastructure and telling us to solve it before the site team tells us. That's been fantastic partnering with a other company out in Boston called Granite, where they have put in a wireless technology and it was okay for our property managers, but not property managers, the leadership at the property management side of it to say, yeah, it's okay, let's put that in. What that has allowed us to do is there's no interruption whatsoever on their work, day-to-day work. It works with, it's wireless, it connects, it sits in between your router and the firewall, and it automatically restarts it if something were to happen. So it's constantly monitoring that. And we partner with Granite, and they have a fantastic NOC which manages that. So we don't even know 9 out of 10 times what something went down at the property, and that's been a great investment for us, and it has made us look really good.
So resilience, disaster recovery, and then not having to roll a truck necessarily.
Correct.
Which is great. Girish, talk to us a little bit about some of the infrastructure investments you're seeing landlords make and where you think they're getting the most bang for their buck.
Yeah, I think a big one we hear about these days is around improving cellular connectivity for buildings. It often used to be the case, if you want to put a DAS in a building, it's going to have all these exorbitant costs, hard to maintain, very invasive sort of footprint on your building. But there are a lot of newer solutions in the neutral host sort of world that can make deploying cellular to buildings cheaper, more effective, easier to maintain, and ultimately, geared towards having a great tenant experience.
What about Wi-Fi calling versus DAS?
Yeah, it's a good question. We really see cellular as like kind of the ultimate solution. Wi-Fi calling has a lot of drawbacks.
I agree. Totally agree.
So from looking out in the next couple of years, you're going to be requested by the C-suite for lots of things. Most of them will involve AI, but we're not going to talk about that here. Beyond that, what do you think in terms of the experience for your residents and for your property staff? How do you think that your organization can support them? What do you think are like the top 2 things you can do to make their jobs a little easier?
For my team, one of the things that I'm totally focused on right now is sort of standardizing the security camera, because we serve the vulnerable population and some of these properties that are in a vulnerable neighborhood, right? So we have to have the security camera up and running all the time. And so one of the things that I'm having a conversation with this leadership team on the property management side of it is to do capital investment and standardize all of that so that we can go to a cloud infrastructure to be able to monitor and manage.
And would you standardize on a solution? Would you standardize on a topology, or sort of what would be the thought process
on
there?
the solution itself.
Got it. And then I guess that brings up a question. You as an internal organization cannot do all of these tasks. You need to rely on the property staff, and you need to rely on partners that are in the space or in the market. How do you do that dance between the managed service provider or the vendors, your staff, and then your team? How does that work for you, Craig?
So it as you said, it is a dance, right? So you've got the property teams need to know who to call, right? So eventually that call, most 9 out of 10 times is going to come to us directly. And then if we can, we'll work with a vendor in the area. Now, I'm fortunate. I've got a couple national vendors that will cover all of our properties, that they can roll a truck if they need to. They will dispatch their techs. They'll work directly through me. I'll communicate to the property management staff. A lot of times, because we are short-staffed, I will allow them just deal with the property management staff as well. But as you said, standardization is huge. So if you have standardized systems, whether it be camera systems, access control, routers, firewalls, it's a lot easier to find a managed service provider that can provide that service no matter where it is, because I'm sure you relate to it too. We have some properties that are out in the middle of nowhere, right? So you're rolling Bob's tire, hair care, and network, and it's hard to find a guy that knows everything about a camera system when it's the first time he's ever seen it. So it's very hard to do that. So having a national vendor that can roll a truck if they need to.
Yeah, I think Kristian, maybe you can sort of touch on it on the commercial. You guys are operating in multiple cities and multiple countries around the world. Sort of how do you do that dance between corporate, property, vendor, all of the players involved in making it all work?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big chunk of this has been around that you would kind of always have the building would be the backbone and the one backbone for everything. You need to kind of separate it now. And then I think there is some vulnerabilities that do exist sometimes when you go with single carrier, right? We can look at WeWork as an example out there that kind of had fall. You have EVgo as or sorry, not Electrify America, pardon me, not EVgo, to go and kind of look at that piece. So it's really comes down to the people, having the people on the boots on the ground is what we're hitting on here. And the switches you tend to kind of be with the home run coming in. So once we kind of get into the building, you only need one sewer stack. Once that sewer stack's there, add as many bathrooms as you want, showers, whatever you want. It's that sewer main that's critical, right? And unfortunately, no one really cares about the sewer main until it breaks, and that happens once every whatever 100 years maybe. But if, the personal home, I'm digressing into that world, but that's just an analogy.
Yeah, just to add on to that, one other thing that I found very helpful that you guys may find helpful as well, educating especially your maintenance guys. Give them that basic networking, basic IT skills, right? A lot of them don't have that. They're great at HVAC. They're great at sewer systems. They're awesome at that. But when you start talking about a network or something's not working, they freeze up. So spending time with your maintenance guys and just teach them, here's a network switch. This is what to look for. If I call you and I need you to reset something, this is where you go. They appreciate that more than anything, and it really helps us with eyes and ears in the field.
And it's all about generalists is where the world's kind of going, right? We've been hyper focused on kind of being specialists. If you are a generalist, we can go a long way, and that's what you need to really focus on. You want to say something?
One thing I'd add is, as a supplier, one of the things we've learned at Meter is that it's important to offer not just a hardware or product, but a service. And so one of the things that we do is we have a network of partners, including we've got some of our partners, NetSpeed over here in the audience today. Any customer of ours can just plug into that network to have boots on the ground. And so especially valuable for real estate owners, lean IT teams that have to manage many spaces.
And when we launched Studio, that was one of the main issues was kind of dealing and scaling that across multiple platforms, right? From one desk to then basically corporate users for entire floors and at multiple stacks. You need to have that solution to kind of scale up as you're describing.
From looking sort of where you're sitting right now with the portfolio you currently have, are you getting to see much new development? I mean, you're getting to write those specs and sort of help them design from the ground up, you hope. Is that something that you're seeing?
It took a while. When I first started, that wasn't the case, but I think they are seeing the benefit of having us up front in the conversation. So we are part of the conversation now. My director of infrastructure participates on those development calls on a regular basis to get all that information up front rather than coming in at the end.
I think one of the things that we've seen a lot is in most real estate organizations, there's a big gap between those that develop and those that operate. And the closer we can get the operators with the developers, the better day two we'll have in terms of the way the building operates. And I think it's great that you have a seat at that table.
Well, this is also the traditional model where it's third party, oil, water with tenant, landlord, or landlord, renter. But basically, the bigger conundrum that you need to go overlook is, you're co-parenting, and you got to go be in a long run and kind of collaborate in that sense going forward. So a lot of that is around the day of, and then I think it's also where you got to go look at what are the new, vulnerabilities, because it's not just at the renewal, and that divestment in terms of kind of where we are, it's coming to the individuals. So anyone can be that one negative Yelp review that then causes rents to decrease by 20% or whatever the number might be hypothetically. So you need to kind of go and get proactive above that to kind of help contain those types of things.
Well, that sounds like an area where the digital infrastructure and the technology can help support the business case, which is if we get good feedback from our residents, if we know what their complaints are, we can address them proactively and not wait for that negative Yelp review. Then we've used technology to better the business case, which I think is a spot where we all in this side need to be helping out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can get to that point where you're more proactive than reactive. And I think anybody in this room has probably lived that, that you want to be proactive, not reactive. So when you can do that ahead of time and gather that tenant data and know where the pain points are for your tenants, what they're really looking for, that gives you an advantage in the market for huge. And I
And the
think our ownership
traditional,
owes
yeah.
it.
Oh, sorry. The traditional model is also gone, right? 9 to 5 is no longer there. Work from home is kind of different, right? That's where you need to kind of go and look at and use this as an advantage. Because basically, humans are creatures of habit, like just go A to B to C. And so basically, if you've seen there's 1,000 people that have been running through the bathrooms here, then you should have cleaning staff there, right? Versus going to the empty floor upstairs. But that's where you can use technology and do a lot of this stuff along the way.
I think, in addition to everything that has been said, I think the demographics that are coming into working for at the site is different too now. They're asking for it, right? They're pushing us to be innovative, bringing the technology that's needed so that they can be 24/7 connected, and they want to be serving their resident. They want to build that relationship, and that's been fantastic in terms of they've become their own advocates, wanting to better connectivity and the technology at the property.
Excellent. I think we can open it up to some questions if people have any questions.
I mean, so the question was basically, do you go from managed networks or do you have little pockets that are for each individual units? So we have examples of both. And I think basically where you have a single pipe, in terms of just sticking with that analogy, you single pipe and then you just kind of offshoot from those. That's how you're going to see it in the future, in my mind. The individual units actually setting up in the home runs to every single unit, that's completely disruptive. And we're not even talking about the use of space, right? So, the riser closets and all that, kind of component, that creates very inefficient space use. So if we can cut that down and do more laterals, that's better.
I think it really comes down to the product type. I mean, if you're talking about a high-end condo, they'll have multiple providers in the building. It'll be pre-wired, and the providers will be there, and the tenants will choose their own. If you're in an affordable environment, the landlord has to require it. And then in a lot of business cases, landlords and residential operators are providing internet and marking it up and using it as a revenue source, as getting more dollars per door. So a little bit of it depends on the product type. In the commercial space, we've seen most landlords sort of try and not be in the internet side of the business for liability purposes. They don't want you to not pay rent because you couldn't get out to the internet. So they'll let the service providers provide those services. But I definitely think we're moving into an era where it's expected that the internet works, the Wi-Fi works, and your phone works. And if it doesn't, I don't want to rent space there. And I think that's where it's going.
So we have some, there are lots of examples that you can point to, right? Business interruption insurance is one area that this comes into play. But overall, what this is basically shown is in the last, you talked about since COVID, really this is that you've got three kind of general cycles in one, right? Baby boomers are leaving the economy. You have millennials coming in, and you have the acceptance of technology, right? Which is basically, like we all gathered in this room here today because you need to go have those social interactions. That's in our DNA, and you need to go learn. But that's kind of outside the work-life balance, and that's where you go see this, that intrigue to kind of learn and grow. And so I think that's where you go see this. I get that's a little tangential, but it's basically going and saying you need to be able to go and adapt this. We aren't talking about satellites right now. That's coming through, right? You then also have basically what's coming in to the whole, kind of deregulation of the internet here. But we can go through that in the different perplexity versus chat versus, the other models. Any other questions? Sorry.
I'll just ask one more question. As we look out, in the next couple of years, you've got this sort of hybrid scenario where you've got on-prem going back to corporate. Do you sort of see as the technology continues to evolve, more and more systems will be cloud-based, like you're trying to do your security cameras, you're talking about leak detection, you're talking about all these solutions that can be out there. Is that sort of where you guys are headed?
Yeah, I think everything's going to end up cloud, right? That connectivity back to corporate. First off, I want to get out of the business of managing it, right? So if I can get everything up to the cloud, a lot better there. I've seen a lot of vendors have approached me recently with cloud managed access control systems. great, right? I can manage that, or we can centrally manage those from our security team, can manage those access controls from a cloud at all of our properties. That's outstanding. I love that. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I think everything's going to go to the cloud. I think that's where we've got to be. We've got to get there. I mean, we haven't even really touched on building automation systems, anything like that, but those are all now going native cloud.
And some of the things that, in my experience working at Beacon, what we've seen is to show them the ROI when it's centralized, managed through centralized location with standardization in place, rather than this decentralized way of managing things. And so what I ended up doing was collecting all the expenses from all the properties for a particular infrastructure, whatever that may be, and sort of say, hey, this is how much it's costing you. If you're to go towards more like centralized, managed by the IT, this is what's going to cost you. From the bottom line perspective, at the portfolio level, it made a huge difference. And that's when they are willing to have a more conversation with me now than 4 years ago, where they were like, they wanted to own it, they wanted to manage it. Now they are looking for us to be able to do more of that.
How are you handling, though, with the cloud infrastructure, a disposition where all of a sudden you own that data, the building gets sold to somebody else? How does that divorce work?
It's never fun. So a lot of it is, I rely on the folks higher than me, right? So when they're making those deals and they decide what they want, there's obviously the basic data. Obviously, we're a real page shop. So if they're a real page customer, we can obviously provide them that access, change ours into historical. They can go in and pull those out, all that stuff. But when we've got to get that data out, it's a data dump. I mean, that has not changed. You've got to download that data, get it to them so they can upload it. It really hasn't changed.
Well, and the SEC compliance piece is also coming into play. So that's another kind of slippery slope here that you gotta have to be looking at. So regulatory pieces, right? All these note takers. If you get into a situation that is, divorce, marriage, right? The baggage comes along. So you got to remember to kind of be able to address that. So that's one other interesting area.
Girish, talk to us a little bit about, on the cellular side, sort of how are you solving that right now, and how have the cost elements come down dramatically, or?
They have actually. So we have a product called Meter Cellular. It leverages core meter sort of firewalls and switches, but we have a custom cellular access point that can provide service to Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T. And it's a order of magnitude lower than DAS costs. And the beauty of it is Meter will design, deploy, and manage the network for customers.
But if you remember, that's also that's a great segue, because basically that's where the market's gone, right? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you'd have AT&T coming in and putting that into your building. Now, as of about 5 years ago, you basically would have to pay for, $1 to $3 million sometimes to get this system stood up. And now you have to go and basically just kind of look at it. Hey, how do we go make that experience universal?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, as a general rule of thumb, whether it's cameras, access control, Wi-Fi infrastructure, cellular infrastructure, we see sort of, everything becoming more similar rather than more different, and a lot of just the management happening in the cloud.
Well, we haven't touched HVAC or parking garages. So are we going to add that on the list?
We'll see.
Okay. Well, no, I think so one area we haven't talked about is kind of like what's next, right? So you have drones, you have autonomous cars, you have smart appliances, and then electrification. And so that is a whole other story. And I think maybe we can talk about a little bit, hey, going from general 110, 120 voltage to PoE, and kind of that whole trend. So that's one other thing to go look at, right? What used to be just power and copper, well, now you need to add fiber. So that's one other trend that you guys look out there that we need to look at. You have to do, so we have to, for our affordable units, we have to go and do fiber to all and do at least 10 gig, right? So I don't know if you're seeing their speed capacities by region too. Are you guys seeing that at all?
We're not. But I think what state of Massachusetts is doing is requiring. But I think they're also putting in the money to get the affordable housing companies to sort of upgrade all their bandwidth coming into their properties.
Yeah.
But it's
We-
the whole IoT, right? I mean, if you really think about it, like bringing in a boiler needs a connectivity these days. Like you want to monitor it, you want to manage it, and so for that, all the data that's
yeah.
being transmitted through your connection, you
Yeah.
need bandwidth.
So CREM, Energy Star, these are all requirements that you have to go meet for your investors in the properties. So, local law 97 in New York is an example of fine. CARB in California. These are regulatory pieces. You have other ones coming into play where you're going to need to go like, this is real financiary. California, the base year is 2026. And basically, you're in local law 97's been in place for about 2 years now for reporting. These are all pieces that come down to basically, sub-metering. You then also have to go and be able to provide what's real usage and then kind of what's my proportionate share? Like, what is that in a common space versus other units?
Well, I think that just ties into your reporting elements of this, where you're going to need your network to support a variety of systems. And we're talking about in California, you have to provide car chargers. You have to have a network to support the car chargers. You have to have a cellular to support the car chargers. Otherwise, you can't get your permits. So all of these regulatory elements are kind of like that other big hurdle. I think we've all been focused a lot on the cost elements in the past couple of years of how do we deliver cost effectively. But the regulatory burden of these things that are kind of hitting us is sort of, that's another wave of infrastructure that we're going to have to sort of solve for. And that's sort of like the foundation piece is if you're going cloud, if you're going hybrid, if you're adding fiber to your buildings, these are all investments that you need to make now so you can comply with the rest of these rules that are going to come hit us, down the road.
And there's no VE in value engineering. So there's no value and there's no engineering because you end up just cutting corners and you get screwed. So you end up paying 3 times as much. So I think that's a big takeaway as you're looking at this, there might be, I'm not throwing like you guys, like you should take this as an opportunity to go like, hey, we aren't cutting corners.
Yeah, and we really do believe in building like enterprise grade, robust networks for customers. And Kristian, to your point on bandwidth requirements, one thing I will say, so we're based in the Bay Area, and if you look at the bandwidth a 100-person SaaS company was purchasing for their office, probably okay with 500 megs to a gig. For that same 100-person robotics or AI company, it's 5 to 10 gig. And so that increase in bandwidth consumption has implications for how many providers you need at a building, the quality and reliability of the digital backbone you have in your buildings. And, that's the case for office today, but I suspect it's going to affect multifamily as well at some point in the future.
And just POEs, right? Your point of entries, and then what your closets, right? So this whole idea that West Texas is the only place for data centers right now out of 737s, and Caterpillar can't get a diesel generator for you till 2029. You're going to have to go hub and spoke versus point to point. You're going to have to do hub and spoke, last miles to go kind of make sure that you can go meet the needs of whether it's that small, that your diversity.
Yeah, on the bandwidth side, that's interesting because the original idea was, did you have fiber to your building in a commercial office, which was great. Now we're seeing these tenants, and Girish mentioned it. They're looking for 10 gig just because that's sort of table stakes for them to manage their network. And the providers have quote unquote fiber in the building, but you get down to it, they don't have the electronics to support that level of bandwidth. And now we're seeing this sort of supply of equipment and electronics dragging behind the fact that we've got fiber, we just don't have the equipment to support the bandwidth in these buildings. And AT&T and Comcast and others are having to redesign networks to support this demand. And it's going to keep coming because, on the multifamily side, streaming and all of the technologies that people are using, and they're expecting it. We have to deliver it as a landlord or a multifamily operator. We have to deliver that. Otherwise, we can't rent the space. So, making sure we have robust infrastructure, we have space in our closets, we have the relationships with the providers so that they can deliver these services is another part of it, because we're not in the internet business. We're in the rental business. So we have to use partners to provide those services. And that's a tricky dance. Instead of trying to monetize it all the time, these are now things that we have to provide. So That's a change.
And HVAC, right? So there's a big difference as you're going for electrification, right? So you used to have these huge walk-in rooms that were, networks. AT&T is kind of that great example of their, real estate footprint, or Verizon, and you kind of now can see that shrunk down to a closet. But basically, you still will need those connection points and kind of core HVAC, even though, as you electrify, which is happening across, you have to get rid of your gas boilers. Then you have to go and basically put that unit somewhere. So help and diversify your loads.
I think the other thing that we struggle with at Beacon, it's also the mission aligned, right? So if you really think about it, the population that's staying at our communities are very vulnerable, and their kids go to the school right there. And sometimes they have to rely on the internet to do their homework and everything, the research, everything. So if we are not providing the bandwidth, and if they cannot afford the internet, then see they are at disadvantage, right? So we are always struggling with sort of trying to figure out the right balance for us to be able to provide them the bandwidth they need for them to succeed in their educational career, right? And it's a debate that it's a topic that we talk about it all the time. It's being misaligned to serve our communities where they need internet connectivity.
Yeah, I think it's huge. You get, as you said, you got to be able to provide that for all the residents when they come in. Work with your carriers. The carriers, I know they're knocking on doors like crazy. I'm sure they've done it to you. Hey, we want to replace all this copper. We're bringing in fiber. We're getting rid of this copper. They're doing it on their dime. Have at it. And so eventually down the road, it's going to become your cost. So let them do it now, so you can provide that bandwidth for all of your residents.
So I think there was one last question back there, and then we'll wrap up. So the question is, how do you get an ROI on your project, and then what are the other aspects that tie into that? For us, it's, I think there's kind of three components to this. One is lost rent, or kind of downtime, right? So that's kind of the one piece. The second is basically what is the need of the market, right? So basically, if it's standard like it is now to have 1 gig circuits throughout your building, then you got to go do that. That's the comp piece, right? But real estate's always been last on that. The third is all around, look around and see what else is going on. So community trends, technology, what's happening in the world.
But I think that's always been the challenge for IT and commercial real estate.
100%.
It's always been a challenge of, is there an ROI? And at some point, if you don't make these investments, you're just not going to be able to compete. And there may not be an ROI today, but if you don't have internet connectivity, people aren't going to rent space. And if you can't provide the reporting that's required by regulatory requirements, you can't lease the space. So that's the challenge that we're facing, is there may not be an easy ROI, which makes it harder for these folks to make that case.
Yeah, I always refer to it as a soft ROI, right? And ask them, okay, what's it cost you to turn that unit, right? If I'm not providing those amenities and these units are turned over yearly, there's a cost to that. So if I can provide those amenities and utilize that capital now into that, I'm saving that money on every time I got to turn that unit.
The one thing on the security camera that I mentioned earlier, what we've been looking at it is the total cost of ownership itself over time, right? Over a 5-year period. Don't think about right now the capital investment that you're making. Think about over time in 5 years, how much support we need to provide that. And if it's something like what we are thinking about it, there isn't a whole lot of things we'll have to do. And we are trying to mitigate the risk side of it by doing that.
All righty, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate everybody for your time.
Thank you.